Smaug is a glorified obstacle for the heroes to overcome, his ominous threats and fiery breath all tropes from heroic legends. Brought together, it creates a giant cliché whose only purpose is to make the First Fellowship's task that much more difficult. He's even ancillary to the main goal in retrieving the Arkenstone. They don't go there planning to slay him. If Bilbo had actually managed to do his one job properly, then he wouldn't have even been an issue. While it's true he seems set on destructive revenge of Lake Town, the only purpose this serves is to fulfill the destiny of Bard the Bowman. When it comes down to it, Smaug is merely a plot device within the stories of others. A problem to be solved.
Yeah, I didn't write that.
It's an article from What Culture published around 4 years ago now, and it represents a mindset that I've seen all too often in the casual side of critical discourse you get in media discussion. The recognition of the plot device is often used as a weapon of criticism against the character filling that role. And that's not to say that plot devices don't exist. They absolutely do, and to say Smaug is one isn't even wrong. He's proud and brags about his greatness despite being unable to kill even a tiny hobbit. And within moments after stepping out of his door, he's killed by a character first introduced in the scene he slew the dragon. On Smaug's characterization alone, there's little more to say, and with such a short screen presence, there is no hint of character development to be found. With so little to say, then the argument should rest that he's not a good character, and thus, only a plot device. But instead of leaving it there, let's dig a little deeper, and instead discuss him relative to the only character he interacts with, the Hobbit Bilbo, who does two very important things in this scene. One is that he notes the chink in Smaug's armor, the missing scale in the coat he's so proud of, and secondly is his powerful boasting, in which he recounts the deeds he's accomplished from his great adventure. By condensing his deeds from throughout the book into a few lines, Bilbo, the tiny hobbit building a courage he wields to laugh at even a live dragon, contextualizes the very meaning of his adventure. This speech is The Hobbit. Bilbo is Smaug's exact opposite, a humble, tiny man who, when challenged by the trials before him, prevailed on his bravery and wit to face down the mightiest beast in the land, a lazy lizard who hasn't been pushed to do anything in years. His deeds from eras long past, his modern accomplishments limited to eating ponies. Yet he's so much more prideful and certain of himself than the tiny Bilbo, and this foolishness brings him ruin as he leaves his home without Bilbo's humble caution. It is in this contrast between the two where Smaug's thematic significance and narrative weight become realized. Those savvy in literature might have caught that Smaug also serves the purpose of a foil, a lens with which to view other characters. But I don't intend to say that Smaug is a foil and not a plot device, because I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. If a character is there to move the story, and they happen to reflect the main character in the process, then their role in the story hasn't changed because they fulfill another purpose. Instead, I want to ask, what's wrong with a character being a plot device? In fact, the definition of plot device is a neutral one, specifying that contrived or arbitrary plot devices are liable to annoy or confuse the audience. And there's nothing arbitrary or contrived about Smaug. As the long-standing catalyst for the adventure, he's a known danger from the beginning, and the traits of his character as a foil to Bilbo hold a meaning to it that excludes them from being meaningless or arbitrary. But while he's not a bad plot device, he also doesn't meet the standards of what supposedly makes a good character. Smaug being Bilbo's foil doesn't alter his characterization any. He's very much still the prideful lizard he was built up to be. Nor does he get character development. If strong characterization and development are what makes the standard for a good character, and Smaug doesn't fill that requirement, then Smaug gets into good character. But can we do better? How do we fix Smaug? If he were to be given other character traits, unless they could be used to meaningfully foil Bilbo, then they would be superfluous, unnecessary, or otherwise muddle the idea his character is meant to evoke. And to give him traits to foil other characters, or give him more of a character arc, would both involve giving him more screen time and focus, in turn making the story about Smaug, about this character who only enters the story at the very end. Would some tragic flashback really deepen his character any, or making him a foil to Bard, a character who is much more important for the non-Smaug related things he does after his victory? And at what point would he still be Smaug? Any character would be strictly better with more screen time and focus in theory, but Smaug's the perfect character for the role in the story he fulfills as is, and to judge him under any other lens is negligent of the narrative intent. There's no room in the story for him to be a better character, and as a plot device he's perfect. So why is it to be taken as an issue that this character is in fact a plot device? It's merely an observation, yet somehow, deducing that a character is in fact a plot device is considered actual criticism. A spade is called a spade, and is called bad for its very existence. A plot device is a storytelling tool, just as the protagonist is. But no one is pointing out that Bilbo is the protagonist and labeling it as criticism. Tools have their uses, and should be judged for their ability to fulfill that purpose. Now, if a tool is bad at fulfilling its purpose, or could be replaced, then it becomes another matter entirely. We've already established that a bad plot device might be arbitrary, contrived, or even unnecessary. So now let's cut into one I feel is less effective at their role in the story. Enoshima Junko is the main antagonist of the Danganronpa franchise, though I'll primarily be talking about the first game here, as it utilizes her in her most active role as an unashamed plot device. She spends most of the game masquerading as the school's headmaster Monokuma, as she's trapped her classmates in a killing game, only allowing them to leave the high school turned shelter if they kill one of their peers and get away with the crime. While as Monokuma she claimed that she would be honest, only giving white lies over the course of the story, further deceptions are uncovered, in particular her act of not following her own rules as she killed another classmate and framed it on the main characters. Their uncovering of this murder prompting her to show herself and begin the finale that unravels the rest of the mysteries built up over the course of the story. So to say she's contrived is a bit of a stretch. She was adequately foreshadowed through Mukuro, and her dismissal of her own rules in service of meeting her own ends allowed for the climax. As these are addressed within the story, one can't say it's totally contrived, as the actions are in service of her motivation. But that motivation is where the issue crops up, specifically in the nature of her potential arbitrarity. Because to answer the question of if she is truly arbitrary or not, we need to ask, why did Monokuma have to be Junko? For the story as is, Monokuma had to be a student as the possibility was suggested and it's in line with the established rules. It had to be Junko because of how Mukuro was established and killed. But to use that exclusively as an explanation suggests that the story's makeup in service of fitting Junko into it are only for the sake of fitting her into it. The loophole and suggestion that the mastermind is among them are only in service of Junko and Mukuro, as they never apply to any other situation. Mukuro herself is primarily significant for her position as a tool being used and abused by the mastermind. But if you were to take the same scenario and swap Junko for, say, Celes, what would actually change? In order to really judge Junko as a plot device, we have to widen the scope to the whole picture. To break down the thematic thrust of Danganronpa, it serves as a response to the social situation regarding high school and its students in Japan. The end of high school is a death of sorts, as to leave high school, a place of expression and relative freedom, is to go into a workforce of assimilation and uniformity. The threat of such a life is one that makes the idea of leaving high school one of dread and anxiety, this dread represented by painting the world outside of Danganronpa's high school as apocalyptic. But it's only potentially so, and even despite that potential for disaster, the main cast resolves to go into the outside world hopeful, accepting of who they are and ready to do their absolute best. Junko serves as a counterpoint by representing some vague concept of despair, a term that means little to nothing even in its own context, let alone trying to take the rest of the franchise into account. And even to look past that, her pride and self-certainty do serve as a mirror to Naigi's humble self-confidence. But this isn't an avenue Junko stands out in. Celes and Leon too refuse to change from their dominating pride, whereas Togami did. The four of them each defined their worth and greatness by their ultimate talent, but only Togami was willing to move beyond that, and so he was the only one who survived. Which once again begs the question of why the mastermind needed to be Junko when her only relevance thematically is either not unique to her, or is in a meaningless descriptor that offers nothing to the meaning and takeaway of the ending. Junko is arbitrary as a plot device because her character is in service to nothing but the story. She enables the story of others, yet doesn't truly connect to it in a meaningful way that helps her stand out as an antagonist of any note beyond happening to be the final one. So now, let's see how we can fix Junko. Not as a character, but as a plot device. To give her character development would again give her too much focus and detract from the other characters. And as much as I would like to change her characterization, it's only partly relevant to the actual discussion. So to approach Junko we need to talk about her two halves, herself and Monokuma. I bring up Monokuma because as headmaster of the academy, he is intentionally divorced from the themes of the story. It's only the students who can graduate. The headmaster is only the facilitator. Had Monokuma been the final antagonist, there would be no issue. He enables the story, the characters grow from it and move on. It's not great, but it does the bare minimum. However, the developers chose to include a final twist for the mastermind. They chose to make the headmaster into a student, yet they did not tie her to the theme in a way that makes for a meaningful final villain. Her murder of Mukuro is only in service to this reveal, rather than the actual core of the story, as once she is revealed, the rules she broke are quickly pushed aside as the story simply moves on. So in order to fix Junko, there needs to be something to her that's connected to the thematic core in a way not echoed by the previous antagonists. And the easiest way to do that would simply be to let her live. Not to escape the school, just to survive. The primary conflict for the main characters in the end is if they should leave the school or not. Leaving means they can begin their lives on their own power, while to stay is to remain stagnant in high school. Junko loved her classmates, and created a situation where she could potentially live with them in high school for eternity. Yet her classmates grew past her and escaped, which would have left her alone, sealed in her dream high school until she chose to leave herself and take the steps towards adulthood that the others did. All these pieces that would go towards getting Junko in line with the thematic push are there, but instead of being tied to the actual meaning of the story, instead she chooses to kill herself because of her despair, leaving little to nothing to take from her character as the story instead removes the plot device after she has fulfilled her role, only to bring her back when she has more plots to device in. She's not a bad plot device because she's not a good character, but rather, she's a bad plot device because the elements that make up her character are in service to a story that works just as well without her, if not better. Something that can't be said about Smaug. Without Smaug, you don't have Bilbo's well-earned boasting. You don't have the core of The Hobbit. But without Junko, you still have Monokuma, or some other character who can serve her purposes just as well. And to give one last example to drive the point home, Good Striker from Lupin Ranger vs. Pat Ranger is a sentient treasure from the Lupin collection and the key piece to both the final strike and giant Kaiser robots used to defeat the monstrous Ganglers. Thus far, his primary role in the story has been to swoop in and give his aid to either of the two conflicting teams. Oftentimes, this aid will be as a reward for some kind of character moment, such as when Keiichiro decides his priority is to protect the people rather than just focus on the Lupin Rangers. But more often, it's obligatory, and the big action set pieces come with the property. To view him as a plot device, his actions are arbitrary as even pointed out in scenes like the one I just showed where he pokes fun of his tendency to show up at just the right moment. And as he is an anomaly among the pieces of the Lupin collection, one could say he was contrived, but to widen the scope and ask what he's in service to, we can't yet. At the time of this writing, Lupin Ranger vs. Pat Ranger is only about 25% complete. So while at the present time, disliking him for his role in the story isn't unjustified, but as the story hasn't concluded, it really isn't fair to judge him for his role as a plot device in the story quite yet, as that role isn't concluded either. With Smaug and Junko, their stories are complete, so they can't be added to, but Good Striker does have that freedom. Now, I'm not one for predictions or clickbait titles, but let's take a crack at what would keep Good Striker from being just an arbitrary little plot device. Is Good Striker secretly evil? Why, Good Striker is stronger than you think. How I see it, if the question is on what Good Striker might be in service to beyond the set-piece moments, then one avenue would be to reveal a motivation for his actions, such as pushing the two Sentai teams together, which would recontextualize his prior deeds, ideally in service of whatever idea the show is intending to explore. He also has ties to the Lupin collection, and thus Arsène Lupin, which may also allow or inform the characterization of the surviving Lupin estate, depending on how his character is expanded on and connected to the other mysteries of the collection. Or he might never get more focus and just remain the goofy little plot device he is. Good Striker could turn out to be good or bad, but recognizing him as a plot device in and of itself isn't really a serviceable criticism, as a plot device is meant to be in service to a larger story, and one that's not over yet should only be dissected and evaluated under the knowledge that it isn't over, and thus that the big picture isn't clear yet. And as the use of a plot device isn't something larger, they can't really be evaluated on their own terms. It would be like trying to rate a sword's hilt as if it were a weapon on its own. All stories are constructed and designed to get across its messages, but if you are to see that construction, pointing it out doesn't serve as meaningful criticism in and of itself, just like a plot device character is one that can't work exclusively for itself. Every character can be better and stronger if they get more focus from the story, but applying such expectations to every single character is negligent of the larger picture that the story as a whole is in service to, and of how stories are told in general. A character works primarily for the story they were made for, and no matter how well fleshed out and developed they are, that context is inseparable from all characters, big and small. Special thanks to my patrons such as Mathwiz, Oliver Mort, Matthew Bukikio, Janaeus Stewart, Luis Segura, Elias Schmidegard, Tengun, Mohammed Hakim, and Volkyan for sticking with me. I just finished moving and there's more content coming soon. Thanks for watching.